Good evening and welcome to tonight's Board of Education meeting for October 24th. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Mrs. Lavelle, can we please have a roll call?
Yes. Mrs. Castelli?
Here.
Mr. Doring? Mrs. Passaretti?
Here.
Mrs. Raccio?
Here.
Ms. Regan?
Here.
Mr. Reynolds?
Here.
Mrs. Roscoe?
Here.
Mr. Ross? Here. Mr. Votto?
Here.
8 members present and voting.
Thank you very much. We will begin this evening with our reports from our student board reps. From Lyman Hall, Paige. Welcome.
Hello, my name is Paige Toohill, and I'm a senior in the class of 2023 at Lyman Hall, and I'm just here to give some updates about the school. So to start, our senior class just held our annual class of 2023 apparel fundraiser, and students and staff were able to purchase sweatshirts, sweatpants, and t-shirts designed with the class of 2023 logo designed by Lyman Hall senior Erica Stein. The funds go to lowering the costs of prom and senior outing for students. Just some general updates. This Friday, our school is putting on a Haunted Hallways event. This is for preschoolers from E.C. Stevens, Cook Hill, Highland, Moses Y, and any other elementary age students from the community are also welcome. Kids will be able to do crafts, trick-or-treating, games, and cupcake decorating. And just overall, it'll just be a fun night for the kids of Wallingford. Student Council is working on 2 main projects right now. Our homecoming date is set for November 18th, the Friday before Thanksgiving. And ticket sales will be happening in early November for the dance. Another event this fall that Student Council is currently planning is Community Day. This is a community service event open to all Lyman Hall students. Students will create teams and are assigned a house belonging to an elderly person to rake their lawn. This is a great opportunity for students to get involved in the Wallingford community and get community service hours. We already have a very good list of seniors going, but we are still looking for more senior citizens to add to our homes for leaf raking. If people are interested, they can call Lyman Hall High School, and they will be put on the list. To publicize, we put up flyers at the Senior Center and contacted churches in the public library as well. For Lyman Hall sports, just a general update, many fall sports teams are wrapping up their season, and most have held their senior night events, a home game where seniors put on. Each sports team are recognized for their hard work and dedication this season. More general updates, Lyman Hall senior Peyton Durant has organized a hockey versus field hockey game for November 10th at 6:30 p.m. to raise awareness and funds for the Lyman Hall Best Buddies chapter. Admission is donation-based, and community support is greatly appreciated, and spectators are always welcome. The Lyman Hall Best Buddies chapter will be having our Halloween match party where members find out their one-to-one friendships this Thursday, October 27th from 2 to 3. Any Board of Ed members are also welcome to attend and meet the 22 to 23 members. The Lyman Hall Unified Sports Team is going to be holding its first soccer tournament on November 9th after school in Milford, Connecticut. Updates from the school counseling department at Lyman Hall. Students in grades 9, 10, and 11 took the PSAT on October 12th, and scores will be available for students in early December. Counselors are planning to meet individually with seniors and their families about their post-secondary plans and assisting them with the process for their chosen path. AP exam registration is currently underway for any student who plans to take an exam in May. And both the UConn ECE and the Gateway Baking and Culinary dual enrollment registration processes just finished for students who signed up to earn credit for eligible classes. And that's all the updates I have. Thank you.
Thank you. What a great update. Lots going on, and I really wish you well for your festivities this week at school. Have a great time. Next, we have Mark T. Sheehan, Jacqueline, and Leah, if you're both going to share, or just one.
Hi, my name is Jacqueline DeBase, and I'm going to be giving the updates for Shan. So students organized a blood drive on October 7th where they could donate blood during the school day. And majority of the fall sports have had their senior nights in this past month, including soccer, field hockey, volleyball, which is tonight, and football, which is this Friday. Some of the sports records are boys soccer's record is 5 wins, 7 losses, and 3 ties. And after not qualifying for several years, boys soccer has finally qualified for states. Girls soccer record is 10 wins, 4 losses, and 1 tie, and they are second in their league currently. Field hockey's record is 7 wins and 7 losses. Football's is 3-3, and volleyball's record is 4 wins and 14 losses. Today began Red Ribbon Week, which lasts until Friday, where students will all wear red to show their support for drug awareness. And tomorrow and Wednesday, Moran 8th grade students will be visiting Sheehan to get a tour of the school and learn about what high school is like. November 3rd is the end of the first marking period for students. And some updates on student council. They are organizing the Veterans Day leaf raking, which we're currently getting senior citizens that want to have us come and rake their yards. And the fall drama production of Radium Girls will play on Friday, November 11th and Saturday the 12th. National Honor Society is holding their induction ceremony on November 14th at Sheehan in the auditorium. And lastly, homecoming is scheduled for November 19th. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Also, a very busy schedule. Next, we will move on for public comment, and I'll read our statement that we always read. The board welcomes public comment as it represents an opportunity for members of the public to express their views to the Board of Ed on matters within the board's authority. We ask that all speakers maintain appropriate standards of decorum. No boisterous or inappropriate conduct is permitted. We expect comments to be respectful and in civil tone, and we will not permit name-calling, raised voices, or vulgarity. All comments must be directed to the board and not to any individual board member or individual member of the administration. Although the board values and appreciates the input of the public, the board and the administration will not be responding to questions or engaging with dialogue during the public comment period. Instead, the board and administration will determine whether, when, and how to address questions that arise during public comment period and whether to address these issues on the agenda of a future meeting. Thank you. And I do have 2 people signed up for public comment. The first is Mrs. Patty Purcell.
Hello, Patty Purcell, 8 Malchudi Drive. And I came tonight because I wanted to thank Pat Reynolds for all his service, but I guess I can't just pick one person, according to the rules. But I served with Pat for 4 years, and I know how hard he works. But I do want to say to all the board members, again, people have no idea how many hours you put in. You're volunteers, and you put hours and hours and hours every month. And I just want to thank all of you. And Pat, you'll be missed. I know you will. But thank you for your service for 10 years.
Mrs. McKay?
Hi, everybody. Roxanne McKay, 294 Ivy Street. Hi, all my friends. How are you? So I'm going to speak through. What's that? I did. I'm going to channel my comments through the chair to direct them to appropriate individuals or individual. But I got to say, it's really strange being on this side of a meeting for Board of Ed. It really is great to see you all. But as a taxpayer, I do want to say thank you for your service on Board of Ed. I probably know better than most taxpayers what it takes to be a Board of Ed, a committed Board of Ed member. And you are committed, and several reasons to want to do it, but to do it. And seriously, it does take a huge commitment. And as a taxpayer, I say thank you. But as a prior board member and board chair for board member 14 years, but chair 10 years, to work through Tammy to a particular person, it was always a privilege. And so people used to say, oh, being a board chair is so hard. And I'd say, you know what? You have no special authority. You have no special anything, except for me, my definition was I was herding cats. So I just want to say Pat Reynolds is one cool cat. But seriously, because I did want to make sure I hit the things that I
Uh-oh.
wanted to recognize in a positive way. And I'm sorry, Mr. Voto, if I'm breaking the rules. You were always a highly knowledgeable individual, obviously with your background in education, which was so invaluable for somebody like myself who doesn't have an education background. So I was a sponge to learn from anybody that was in the education world and provided insights for me. So I thank you for that. You're committed to the work, and not just by, obviously showing up, and attendance is key, but engaged and committed to doing the work. And always in your decision-making, putting students first. And I know most of you up here, and I know you do that every single day. Every decision you make, the administration, the staff, everybody, that you put students first, and I thank you for that. And last of all, just an overall team player. So all in all, I wish you well. I thank you again, and I appreciate you letting me indulge and do a little snake over to say some particular remarks. Enjoy your meeting.
Is there any other public comment? Somebody that might have shown up late that wants to speak? Okay, seeing none, we'll close public comment. We are now on to presentation and awards. Mrs. Belizzi.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. We just wanted to say a few words. So we want to thank you, Pat, for all of your 11 years of service on the Wallingford Board of Education and for your consistent support to the students, the staff, the families, and to all of the time and dedication you've given to all of us here. Throughout your work on the board on the various committees such as policy, STEM steering, plan of conservation and development, electric bus, and energy efficiency committees, your input has helped to shape the vision of this district. To you, Mr. Reynolds, you have worked tireless for our students, and your energy and your common sense approach to issues made you such a valuable voice to the work in this district. We are really going to miss you, and we wish you all the best in your future endeavors. And we want to thank you for everything you have done for us, for our support here, for the students, the families, but for us here at Central Office, for our administrators, really from the bottom of our heart, we wish you all the best, and thank you for all you've done. We appreciate it.
Okay, I know there's some board members that might want to say a few words. Jen, would you like to start? Sure.
So Patrick and I served together. I say served in the past tense. I hate saying served on the policy committee. So I had a front row seat to how dedicated and how hard Patrick worked. Policy committee is really tough, and we meet quite a bit. And the last 9 to 12 months was really, really tough on policy committee. So I had a front row seat to really how difficult of a job Patrick has. And you did a great job, and I really value you for all the expertise that you brought along to the policy committee and your perspective and your dedication. And a lot of what I'm going to say, or what I was going to say, are things that you've heard already. Thank you for your service and how valued you are, and how much we're all going to miss you. And it doesn't make it any less true, even though we're probably going to be all saying very similar things. But I did want to say two possibly unique things. One is that Patrick never made me feel like the new kid on the block. And I am a new board member, and you never made me feel like I'm the newbie. So thank you for that. And the other thing on a personal note, I'm really going to miss sharing stories about teaching in higher education. sometimes, dare I say, war stories of being a science educator in higher education. So we would, especially around, yeah, we would commiserate. Around final exam time, we would share some woes, and that was always nice to share that with you. So I'm going to miss that a lot. But best of luck to you, honestly.
Anybody else? Absolutely, Mrs. Roscoe.
There we go. Pat, I just wanted to take a quick moment to say thank you so much for the openness that you welcomed the new board members with, and how readily you shared your decade worth of knowledge and experience with us. It was really, for me, a way to learn as I experienced so many things for the first time. And I think one of the things I'm going to miss the most about working with you is your willingness to listen with just very open eyes and an open heart. And it's something I just have really grown to appreciate about you, and just your level-headedness when you're talking about issues. So I know this wasn't an easy decision for you, but I wish you so much of the best, and thank you for everything you did in the previous years and this year. So I will for sure miss you.
Yep.
Mr. Reynolds, I'll go next. There's a lot I could say in echo that's already been said, but you have been an amazing role model. You have taken on topics that we didn't know much about, and you've done research on them, and you've looked at other districts, and you've brought things back to us. And when we think about what lifelong learning means, you've done that. And electric bus comes to mind, and we didn't get all electric buses, but boy, you really dug in there, and you did the research, and you knew what the benefits and the costs were, and that's above and beyond all the committees and things that we've talked about that all board members participate in. That was just something of your passion. When you have the passion to do it, you just jump in there and you do what's best for kids and families in the community, and for many, many, many years. It's been a privilege and an honor, so I thank you for all of your service.
Thank you.
Very much. Mr. Ross, and then Mrs. Costelli.
I would actually like to go last, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, Patrick, I've known you many years before I was a member of a board, and you were, the Reynolds family has been in Wallingford a long time, and you have done your family proud.
Oh, thank you.
That's all I can say. You have done your family proud. Thank you.
I got a list.
Mrs. Regan.
I can't add any other color than what's already been said, so I'm just going to say thank you for all your service and your patience with us.
Thank you.
Mr. Votto?
Oh, I'm sitting here listening to this. I'm thinking, Mrs. Passaretti, how did Mike Votto treat the newbies?
I'll tell you later.
And I'm not ready to leave yet, so.
That's when you resign, then I'll bring that out.
Not going to happen. Okay. At least I don't think it's going to happen, but anyhow. I just want to say, Pat, we really didn't know each other before board business, and I think over the years we've become good friends. And I always know you always had the best interest of our children at heart. I think now as your family is growing with grandchildren, you now can use it in another way, and I think that's one of the reasons why you're leaving the board, I think, and I think you're smart in doing that, because those years go by real fast.
Yes. Yep.
You've always used your expertise and experience in education when you had to make decisions, and you were very passionate about what the board's expectation should be for all the children in the district. Team player for sure. Always went along with everybody if you thought it was the good thing to do. Always gave much thought and reflection from an educator's point of view, and that's important. We can kind of see things in a different light because we've been there.
Yep.
It was good for me, because in the beginning when you and I were the only educators, and anytime a new strategy or a new program came about, we'd look at each other and say, oh my gosh, we didn't do it that way. And it always made me feel good that there was somebody else who thought like me, and I'm going to miss that. Not saying the new things are not good, but there are some older things that have been done and strategies that have always worked, and we have to remember that. But anyhow, before I get too political about that, it was good to have you as another person on the board who was in the same place with me when it came to things like that, and I truly appreciate it, and we are going to miss your expertise. So good luck to you, and have fun with those grandchildren.
Thank you.
Mrs. Costello?
Okay, so I'm up. All right. And for those of you here, I had to write it because when you get to be my age, sometimes the words just, you get lost. You can't think of the words. So it's a cheat sheet, and but heartfelt. I want to absolutely echo everything that people have said about you, Pat. Team player, always there, willing to help. I want to acknowledge and thank you for your steadfast friendship throughout our years together. Our many one-on-one conversations on myriad topics, from astronomy, which Pat teaches, I learned a lot, to grandkids. Oh, the stories. Oh, the stories. Boy. And of course, our district. We faced a few challenges together during that time, didn't we? Like the redistricting to K2 and 3-5, and then COVID with the virtual learning challenges and the mask mandate issues, and a lot more in between. Sometimes we agreed, and sometimes we disagreed, but that never stopped us from respecting each other's opinions. I know we will continue our friendship, Pat, and I know I can always count on you to lend an ear. Oh, just one more thing. In case you didn't know, that's your favorite phrase to say about in every phone call. Just one more thing. So Pat, just one more thing. Good luck, good health, and stay in touch.
Thank you. That's it? No questions? Now, if I could say a few things. First and foremost, I want to thank all of you, and especially you, experienced senior members. I know it took a lot to listen to my corny jokes and my stories. You newbies, you got a taste of it, but right? Some of my stories lasted for days, okay? But no, I always considered this. I mean, when I was growing up, and we were like in this room asked during the forum, why did you go into politics? And again, I was raised in a family. My father was a police officer. My mother was an activist. Always give back to the community. So I found, almost by accident, somebody asked me to run. I found, the Board of Ed. And again, to this day, I'm always feel honored and privileged, to be able to serve the community, the way we do collectively. And I kind of look at this almost as a family. Yeah, we squabble. We have little differences, but when you think about it, though, whether you're talking about the teachers, administrators, staff members, the workers and everything, we all more or less take care of each other. We do. We kind of look, and we see somebody stumbling, falling down, kind of boost on. We did this in COVID, the various groups that were asked to do a lot more above and beyond. We always kind of were there, all right? Like I said, we did have a few squabbles here and there, but for all intents and purposes, we did well. The thing I'm probably, and again, I'm not taking really any credit for this, but I was on the board, and it started, I believe, with Dr. Menzo, is that, and I was telling the superintendent earlier, when I got out of high school in 1971, you either went to college or you're a failure. That was it. Yeah, as a senior, they said, well, so where are you going to college? Well, I'm not, and they look at you like. What I am so proud of this district, and I hope we keep expanding and expanding, are we have created so many pathways now, whether we're talking advanced manufacturing, nursing, on and on and on, where, because college, everybody should have the opportunity to go to college, but not everybody's, really, ready for, or really want to go, and to force students like, they did in my generation. So that one thing, looking back on that, is it's exciting. And the other thing, one last thing about the, is, as this family, again, we all have the same objective, the same purpose, is to try to create an environment where our young people can develop responsibility, acquire the knowledge, the talent, the skill set needed to be successful and, more important, productive and caring individuals. And I think that that's where, I mean, again, we're nowhere near done, but I think we've made, progress in that direction. Because that's what's key, what key is. Yeah, having grades and this and that, but what kind of an individual do we have that comes walking out, off that stage with their diploma in hand? And I think we're seeing this improvement with our children. Okay. Now, I do have some handouts. No, I just got out of college. But we do have the PowerPoint, right? It shouldn't take more than 30, 40 minutes, folks, okay? No, that's it. And once again, thank you for all your kind words. Really, thank you.
Thank you, Pat. You will be
Yep.
missed.
That's it, I guess.
You're not leaving.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Now you're going to make me cry. Thanks, everybody.
You're really not leaving, right?
Thank you, everyone. Next, we are going to move on to item number 2 under presentations and awards, and this is our All Schools Facility Study presentation. This is a presentation tonight. This is not a Q&A. It will be behind us, so if there are board members who would like to, the first 2 rows have been kept empty. Not that we don't have enough space here, but if board members would like to go into the audience instead of having to turn around, they are more than welcome to, as I'm going to.
Okay, good evening, everybody. My name is David Stein. I'm a principal with Silver, Petroselli and Associates.
Michelle Miller, I'm an architect with Silver Petroselli.
Pete Prouda, consultant.
Well, thank you, everybody. So let me just get us queued up correctly. It looks like we're just slightly backwards, so. Here we are, back at the beginning. So again, good evening, everybody. So we're gonna walk you through. We have. I know the board members have copies in front of you of the slideshow too, and that will be showing up above. Wanted to some of the new board members may not be familiar with some of the study of our group. We've been working with the Board of Ed on some previous evaluations, started with evaluations at the high school and the middle school. And this new study really began to now roll in, evaluating the, really from K all the way through 12, and evaluating the utilization of the building. And Michelle's going to talk a bit about that. So really it started with the enrollment projections. So there are enrollment projections that the board had. We have, Peter has been brought on as doing that demography, and we'll talk about the projections that we've done independently and just that comparison to those going forward. We looked at each of the infrastructure of the buildings that you have in terms of its building infrastructure. We looked at the educational component on how well those spaces are being utilized, any efficiencies that are there, any inefficiencies that are there. And then we began to sort of roll that into the work that we last left off with, which was the evaluation of the high school and the consideration of a renovate as new, or additions or renovations, or even a consolidation of the high school. So with that, we also looked at some of your other infrastructure that you have across the district such as central office, adult education that's located at the train station, and your Wallingford Transition Academy, and a potential or a possibility of sort of moving that around and consolidating that in the current police station that eventually will be moved out. And we provided the test fit to see whether or not there was some possibilities along with that. So sort of the 4 bullet points that you see up here, that's sort of the breadth of our presentation, but we'll sort of go through the details of that as we move forward. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Peter to talk about the enrollment projections.
Hi, I'm Pete Prouda. I'm currently a private consultant after working 30 years at the State Department of Education. So I've been doing this method and projecting for about 42 years now. I use the cohort survival method, which is what NESDEC uses. I have a couple variations on that. It's a pretty standard method of projecting. I take into account births. We do a birth to kindergarten growth. We look then at what happens grade to grade, year to year. So first grade 1 year with second grade the next year, see what happens in those grades. And in high school, I happen to break the enrollment into 2 components, your resident enrollment and your non-residents in your ASTE program. I consider this a preliminary question. Every time you do one of these, you look at the numbers do speak to me, and then I have to talk to the superintendent and her staff to get what's behind some of them. I'll give you an example. In 9th grade, 3 years ago, the number of kids retained changed. I posed the question to the superintendent, and depending, it's going to take a little while to get the answer, but when I do, we might have to revise the projection. So I think this is, these are going to be close, but they are preliminary. So what we see district-wide is relatively little change in the upcoming 10 years. I project a decline in 93 students is 1.8%. To put that in perspective, you lost 964 students over the past 10 years. That's a 15.4% loss. In your early elementary grades, this is pre-K to 2, you declined 80 students, which is 5.9% in the last 10 years. I've got you growing by 86 students, 6.7% between October 22 and October 2032. In your intermediate elementary grades, you declined by 350 students, which was 24.4% in the past 10 years. There's a projected growth of 53 students, of plus 4.9% in the next 10. Grades 6 to 8, your middle schools, it declined by 214 students, or 15.4%. In the past 10 years, a projected decline of 43 students, or 3.7%. And at the high school, your resident enrollment declined by 350 students, which is 18.3%, and there's a projected decline of 161 resident students, or 10.3% in the next 10 years. I've got a projection of your agricultural science enrollment that's based on what's happened, projected enrollment in your sending towns in grade 8. But that's just preliminary. We could change it based on a capacity model, which could give your high school a little larger number. So basically you can see as, I'd almost say the amount of change in the first, in the elementary and middle grades, It's fairly steady. It looks like the decline is pretty much over. We're going to have a little bit, but not much. And in the high school, the decline is still continuing. Thank you.
So as what's outlined here, and when we get into the next piece of looking at each of the facilities, keep in mind, and I think the last slide that's up here is showing that continual decline on the high school piece of it, because that's really sort of where we last left off on this presentation. And as you could see, going back to 12, that decline from 2,000 to a projection of 15, almost 1,600 students. That's where you're going to start seeing the utilization rates change significantly and how large those buildings are with this reduction in students. So sort of keep that in mind as we're going through this, is how well are the spaces being utilized based on these projections. These projections are fairly close to the ones that were done through the NESDAQ, so I think the story or that through line is similar, so there's not an anomaly between each of us sort of arguing with each other over the numbers. It's still consistent with the numbers that we've seen that were prepared for you in the past. So with that, I'll turn it over to Michelle.
I'm going to take you through the utilization and facility needs of all the schools. So just to explain how we determine the utilization, I'm just going to explain kind of our steps. First, we went to go visit your buildings. We studied the floor plans. I met with all your principals, along with administration members. We walked the buildings. We also received room inventory. So we kind of take all that and also understand the size of your classrooms, the uses, and we also do compare that with the state standards, which I'll walk you through momentarily. So just to start, this is a floor plan of one of your elementary schools, and I'm just using it here as an example. We went into this school and we learned where all the different components are. Your light blue, how do I do this now? Yeah, okay, ooh, sorry, I'm new with this cool little laser, so. Your light blue is your general classrooms, so we have 17 of them. We kind of look at the average square footage. These are pretty on par with what we'd like to see. And we total up the square footage there. We also do that with the pre-K classrooms. The dark purple is your special education classrooms. Light purple is your art, music, and computers. We have the light pink media center, physical education, which is your gym. You'll see we do color the stage a darker green. As we get into the middle and high schools, you'll see the auditorium, that same green. Your food service is a light orange. Administration, you'll typically see at the front door there. And then your building infrastructure is your toilet rooms, your mechanical rooms, electrical rooms. And then the remainder is your circulation, your hallways, and the structure of the building to the outside of the walls. You'll see these spreadsheets for every school. And at the end, we do mention Connecticut State Space Standards. And I'll take you to the next slide to kind of show you that. The state has guidelines on how large a school should be, and that's based on population. This is one of their spreadsheets here that we plug the numbers of students in per grade, and it comes up with a formula that therefore determines the size the building should be according to them. All of your schools are going to be higher than that. It's common through all the schools in all of Connecticut. This is just a criteria they set to set your reimbursement rate. So we wanted to look at that with each school so we can understand. Wallingford has a reimbursement rate of 53.22%, but when your buildings are oversized, they reduce that accordingly. So we do take that into account for all the schools as we move through that. You'll notice we also have these little pie chart type of things that we look at all of your program. And we kind of put that in 3 categories. Your core learning, which is wherever active learning is typically going on. And then your school support, which is more of your administration and your cafeteria. And then your facility support, which is your infrastructure and your circulation. So we're kind of just looking at all the schools, and we typically look for the core learning to be around 50% or more. But now we're going to throw percents at you for each school. How well utilized is this school? And we want you to understand that we are looking at the total number of general classrooms at all the schools. So all those light blue and dark blue classrooms. We're not going to look at special ed. Usually they're smaller classrooms. We're not going to look at art, music, CTE classrooms. They're specialized and focused for those uses. We want to figure out how many general classrooms are there, look at your class size policies, and overlay that to determine the maximum amount of students that the building can hold as it's programmed today. So with that, this particular school came to an 81%. And if you look at this little chart, we say 80 to 100% is pretty good. You know, you don't want to be too close to that 100. You want a little bit of room for growth, but you don't want to be any lower than 80. Otherwise, you're not as well utilized. So this is the method we're going to take through all the schools. We're also going to look at the building limitations and facility needs. During our walkthroughs, we visually observed items or heard from your principals and staff about certain items that really need to be improved. What programs that are offered and the future goals really come into play. We also had some group meetings with your administrators and your curriculum coordinators that were really helpful to understand your future goals and needs for these schools. Additionally, we obtained your facilities strategic plan and capital needs, so we overlay the costs in there with our recommendations so we can kind of come up with a good building total of the needs. So we are going to start looking at the pre-K through grade 2 schools. Just so you know, we did kind of condense most of the schools. There are backup information towards the end of your packets there that do show the detail, so I don't have the specific detail in these slides. But as you can see, we walked all your schools, all very different. Highland was the pods there. There, the biggest needs all can't be addressed, which are long corridors and all that, but some of the other needs are restrooms there. Cook Hill, if you look, okay, Cook Hill, there's a cut line here which shows you where the portables then begin. We do want you to know those 4 portables there date all the way back to 1989. The rest of the portables start 1993, and in 1999, those were all put together and built. They are way past their time. They are not meant to be a permanent structure. So one of our recommendations is to remove those and replace that with an addition. Stevens School, we do recommend some restroom renovations, and also you have your STARS program. Your STARS program down here, which were really office spaces, and we feel those are pretty small for them and not working adequately, that they could use some renovations there. Moses Y just had some restroom needs also and some storage needs. Next slide. These are the summary sheets that you're going to start to see at the end of each grouping of schools. On the right-hand side are the program spreadsheets. We do start by listing all the years that these schools were constructed, and as you can see, they're all from 1950 to 1962. So they are older buildings, and we, again, break down all that program and kind of get to a bottom line. Again, comparing with the state space standards, you get the difference there. But most importantly, we're going to determine that maximum program capacity. That's how many students could fit in these buildings, and you'll see their utilization rates here. So we're looking pretty good at your pre-K through 2 schools with an average of 87% utilized. Now over to the left is our summary sheet on costs. We always start with your strategic and capital needs prices for each school. So that's totaling at 2.8 there. Then our recommendations are in the green. You'll see Cook Hill has the largest because, again, we are recommending an addition there to take over the portables. The rest, as I mentioned, are restrooms, some renovations to STARS, and we also are recommending HVAC at all the schools. In the state of our climate right now with COVID and everything, we know that air quality is an important issue, and we recommend addressing that at all the schools. So all in all, we do come up with $25.8 million of work at these schools. And with our anticipated reimbursement rate, we believe that would cost the town about $13.6 million. And I do want to mention our prices. We We're not out there measuring, creating construction documents. These are our best assumptions based on what we know about the market today, which is changing every day. So we're doing our best to give you a good picture of what it could cost to address these items. Next, we'll move on to your 3 through 5 schools. Here we have Fritz. I think the biggest issue there was the lack of storage. The stage is completely full, and we do include a cost to help kind of create some more storage space throughout the school. Rock Hill, just like Highland, has issues with the restrooms, so we really recommend renovating those restrooms and addressing the storage and this kind of shared space between all the pods. Parker Farms has the Ben Haven program, and they really do need a restroom for special needs students built into that to make that adequately work. Pond Hill has a bunch of different uses going on in kind of one classroom, and it might be beneficial for them to kind of break that up into smaller rooms, so we have that included in our improvements. But, I went the wrong way. Okay. All right, to take you through the summary, programmatically, Fritz is your oldest school beginning in 1925, and the remainder of your schools are again in that era of the 50s and 60s, which is pretty typical. We again add up all the square footage and determine your overall, and we compare that with the space standards here. And then again, what we're focused on here is, sorry about that, is the program capacity and the utilization. So here we have a little bit drop in utilization. Fritz is 74, Parker Farms is 78, Pond Hill 83, Rock Hill 82, so averaging a 79%. So we're just dipping below that area.
So I just wanted to pause here, so as you're seeing those numbers and we're sort of putting the bubble on there to try to, so you can kind of bring it all back to Peter's piece. As we see the drop in enrollment, or even in some cases with this model remaining relatively even with a little bit of dip here or there, the buildings have room for growth. So if there is some anomaly and there is some spike, you have the ability to do that. What it's also telling us is we have the ability to do some expansion and improve on programs. I wanted to point out with the numbers that we're showing this as like we're sort of consolidating all the ideas and putting it into one. The HVAC is probably the largest of the dollar, and the infrastructure improvements to those. These don't have to be done now. These could be done in a portion as you make your decisions on how you want to address those program needs. We listen to the educators on their recommendations, things that we saw in terms of improvements, and this also brings in your current strategic plan that you've already developed and evaluated and have in your system. So this includes that. How that all sort of dovetails together as a full-blown project on all these schools, we're just showing these as numbers. So I don't want to sort of overemphasize that, boy, look at this impact that has to be done today. These are sort of showing these a consolidation of potential work that can be done. It's not something that you necessarily have to jump on right now. It could be brought into a part. It could be further evaluated. And again, we're just looking at broad numbers, cost per square foot of similar projects that would be done on a renovation model, and then just also pointing out the fact that there is the state reimbursement that comes into the equation. So I just wanted to point that out when you're looking at these numbers. But the conclusion with 3 through 5, again, is that there's room for expansion. So there's room to be able to implement what some of the programmatic elements that have been suggested.
On the left is our summary of costs, as Dave pointed out, are the strategic and capital plans above, and then our recommendations below, totaling at $17.7 million with reimbursement. It could be $10.2 million, roughly. And I don't know if I mentioned here, this last row is just the past Office of School Construction costs that is tallied for these schools over the last 30 plus years. That's what they have listed, so we're just putting it there for reference. Yes. So that last row I have there on the graph, it's the past SCG investment. So that's the actual website where it comes from down there. It's the state's tracking of the financials that have been spent on school projects here.
So essentially, it's any of the projects that you've received reimbursement in the 20-plus years from their tracking. So it's actually an important one to note when we get to, for example, the roofs were recently done, so there was a large investment. That's what probably most of these numbers concluded. Also, the work that was previously done with the addition of renovations across all 11 schools. So that's the itemization of those numbers. If there is work that you have done that is still in their book that's being sort of amateurized, the state wants that to go through its full life cycle. So if there's any work with HVAC that may compromise the roof, they will look at that and they may sort of prorate that down. But we're just sort of pointing that out to just be mindful of that. There's money that most likely is still being amateurized that you would evaluate and be part of the equation as your net cost from the state.
Moving on to grades 6 through 8, your middle schools. It looks like we're looking at almost the same floor plan. Moran was built first, and then I think on DAG they kind of learned the mistake they made putting the music room behind the auditorium, so students have to travel through the auditorium to get to their music class, which can be prohibitive of what's happening in the auditorium. Whereas DAG kind of nailed it and they have the rooms accessible. And the gym additions are a little bit different, and the elevator locations. Oops. So, I'm going the wrong way. All right, okay. So the issues we noted here mainly were with HVAC, getting the whole building to have HVAC, AC throughout, and it's the science rooms. If you look here, this room is colored purple. It's meant to be, I think, a music classroom over there, but it's sitting there in a science room with peninsulas. It's just the way the building's been adapted to use with their teaming structure, and now those science rooms aren't being used for what they are, and they should be renovated to work better for their purpose. So that's kind of what we included in our pricing here, but just to scoot over to the utilization, both these buildings, again, 1962 and 1961. We have the same pretty much the same buildings, but the utilization is different based on the enrollment numbers. So our maximum program capacity is fairly similar, but with the students there, it becomes an 86% at DAG and a 79% at Moran, which is an average of 82%, so it's not bad. Here, the strategic capital needs are up here. We have our recommendations, again, HVAC and science room improvements, to get us to a $14 million total cost with possibly 4.5 of reimbursement to a 9.5.
So as we sort of pause here and look at the numbers, the buildings are, they are really sister schools in their original design, although there were some modifications that were done between each of them. The student population is roughly the same between both of them. I think they're so close that I would consider them to be even. But when you begin to even look at a bit of the decline, and then when we go to the high schools, that's where the largest dip is. These two buildings definitely are challenged with some of just their fit and finish and sort of modernizing them, especially classrooms that have been sort of converted or used like science, as we're using as an example, and then converted to another use. They could use some improvements there to just really improve the programmatic element of it. And then just the overall infrastructure of, those buildings that were built in '62, and then some of the modifications that were done in 2000, or just at the end of that cycle of renovation.
So with that, we did want to explore renovate as new. What if we renovated as new these two middle schools? And you can see how we broke our numbers out here. Hard construction cost is truly based off of the square footage, and then we're adding a owner's contingency and your soft costs on top of that to come up with a total project cost. And then we apply the 53.22%, but then degrade that based on what the state would do based on your population. So we're coming up with just under a $39 million project and a $37 million project.
So the state, as you saw in one of the first slides, says based on your student population, they will depict and tell you what size your building should be. Most schools in the state of Connecticut that were built in the 60s or the 70s are larger than needed, when, and especially with the declining enrollment. In your case, these buildings were built for a larger population, and you've seen from even going back 10 years and projecting out forward, your buildings are even sort of larger than they need. We are using the term renovate as new. That's a term from the state of Connecticut. The Office of School Construction Grants uses to define a method of renovating a building that essentially can be certified to last 20 years. So any work that we are doing to the mechanical systems, to the building envelope, to the finishes, to the drainage system, can be certified and says that has a life cycle of at least 20 years. So this is a fairly heavy renovation that would be addressed, and you still keep primary walls, you still keep the primary superstructure. The roof in this case is still in its life cycle, so the roof would stay in place, so other elements like that would sort of come into play. So when we use it's renovate like new, it's not a new building, it's not demolishing any part of the building, it's working with what you have. It's still a 120,000 square foot building for DAG and 115,000 square foot for Moran. So just wanted to clarify what that means.
Here, we'll just compare the two options for you. The alterations have a total cost of $14 million, where renovate as new is $123 million, and then your reimbursement is $9.5 to $76.5 million. Under the alterations, it is limited focused. We're focusing on just what we had mentioned and all the items in the capital plan for them. Whereas a renovate as new is going to be a building-wide improved educational programming. Both buildings would be full AC, so just kind of comparing that. But construction will be a limited impact on the school with alterations and a pretty major impact on the school if you do renovate as new. So phasing or portables would come into play typically with projects like that. Now we'll move on to 9 through 12, your high schools. Starting with Lyman Hall. Here you can see, built in 1968. We have 50 classrooms. If you note here, many of these classrooms are really small. We like to see an 800 square foot. A lot of theirs are undersized. Additionally, the casework in these classrooms are not ideal and prohibit a lot of flexibility and typical learning you'd like to see for today. But now we go through all of the components of the school and add that up, and also to note, we are not including VOAG in this calculation. This doesn't have to do with the VOAG component. So it's just under 200,000 square feet without VOAG. Based on space standards, they're looking at 160, almost 3,000, so it's not too far over. Here's our little pie chart showing 52% core learning. But now moving over to our utilization, we're getting a current utilization of 76%. Now to look at some of the improvements that we could do here, we know that the gym is small, undersized, so I know there's a need for adding a gym on and putting this one as an auxiliary gym. The culinary program is thriving here and they could use some more space. And then on top of what I mentioned about the classrooms, the science classrooms are really poor with the fact that they're not all connected and utilized in that sense, and just the layout really isn't working. So we're including renovations there. Additionally, we had a great meeting with the curriculum coordinators and administrators and came up with a list of items that would be great to see in the high school, and you'll see that carried through both schools: a Math 360 lab, improved music storage, art storage and sinks, a world language lab, a career center, TV production, some CTE improvements, a medical fragile room, and then HVAC improvements. Sorry about that. So we're coming up with about $24 million worth of work here with a reimbursement of almost $10.5 million to get you to 13, Wallingford's cost of 13.5. In the chart here, you'll see that we're also adding on those capital need improvements at 2.889 there. Okay. Now looking at Sheehan, some of the same, they actually have the same amount of classrooms here, similar issues with some of the size and layout of these classrooms not working as well, including the science classrooms. Here you'll notice dark blue comes into play here. We have the district's copy center and district's IT down here. So that's taking up some space there. We're looking at 217,000 square feet. Now with the pool and the planetarium, those are things you wouldn't always see, so they're adding to that size also. Core learning is at 51%, and our utilization rate drops lower here based on population. It's at 59%. So there are still some needs here. Science improvements would be good here. These central classrooms in the middle there. And then administration is really undersized, specifically their counseling department, so looking at expanding that. So the list includes all the same items I had mentioned, including culinary improvements. Here there's some additional things like the locker rooms need renovation. They don't need a whole gym, but that needs to be accounted for. The arts and ABC doesn't have a science room. That's specialized programs. They need their own science room. Otherwise, the list is fairly the same, and this one totals at just over 18 million with a 5.6 of reimbursement, having that be 12.4 to Wallingford. When you add also the 7.6 million of the strategic plan on top of that. So looking at the summaries here, we have our program summary, and adding our two high schools together, we're looking at a utilization rate of 68%. Here, the costs total altogether at 52.6 million, with a potential of 16 reimbursement, costing Wallingford 36.5 million. So we have, okay, wait, you want to say?
So, so concluding, looking at the high schools, especially with the larger drop in enrollment, you're now seeing that those utilization rates are really dipped even at the high schools, because those were designed at the time with a much larger capacity in mind. Even at Sheehan, you're using some of your central district in that, such as the copy center and such. So that's even infilled in these equations. It obviously gives you room to be able to do these alteration work, which is important, because you have room to sort of phase the project and move students around if you were doing that work. But these buildings are larger than your current enrollment and then the declined enrollment. So again, as we started this presentation, looking at your K through 2, we saw you're about there. We get to 3 through 5, and it's similar. Middle school, it starts to drop, and then when we get to the high schools, these are much larger than what your overall population is. So, so with that, it gets to be expensive to renovate all that square footage. So that's why you're seeing these large numbers there, is because when you're doing something like this, you have to touch all of it as far as those renovations. So we'll continue on.
So we did want to revisit the concept of one high school. This is the program that was built in our last study about two-ish years ago. So just kind of using this as a starting point. You know, it's not about the floor plan really, it's just here as a representation. We want to just kind of focus on the square footage number of 334,000 square feet. We're looking at building a new high school with that. So we took that and updated the numbers based on today's numbers. And we're also comparing that with renovating the high schools here. So on the left, you'll see the two high schools, are renovating both of them, adding all our costs up to get to $218.4 million. With reimbursement, you're going to get to $137.2 million. So then looking at this new theoretical high school of 334,000 square feet, so it's less square footage than renovating the 417,000 square feet of the two schools. So that's why you'll see a little bit of a difference in price there. But new does cost more, and your reimbursement rate does drop when you build new. They reduce it by 10%, so we're using 43.22. And then, again, we're still a little oversized based on population, so there is a reduction, and I can't quite get over there, but it'll cost Wallingford, well, the total costs $239.7, and it could cost Wallingford $154.9. This one, we wanted to put that side-by-side comparison of your alterations, your renovate as new, and your new construction. So the prices go from 36.6 to 137.2 to 154.9.
So these comparisons are looking at alterations to roughly 400,000 square feet between the two buildings. Building new, we're able to significantly downsize that based on your projected enrollment, roughly 1,700 students. That new construction would have to contemplate any future expansion in any capacity, just room for that, but also room within that space. We would need to stay within the space standards, but it's obviously a smaller building footprint and so forth. So these comparisons are those alterations that can be done in chunks if so desired. The renovate as new is still touching all of your infrastructure. It's a heavy renovation. It's renovating while students are in session. Build new obviously still has complications of construction, but the goal there would be you would build new and then you would sort of move into that. Our previous concept showed that on Lyman Hall, but you're starting to see the cost impacts between a renovate as new and new. There's different reimbursement that goes along with it, but the renovate as new is a much more intense type of construction and duration that goes along with that.
And then also, we're just listing the 25 highest enrollment high schools in Connecticut. So we have all those kind of listed just so you can see something comparable, list their rating and their DRG just for reference.
So to try to look at, I guess, some of our neighbors, you know, one of the largest high schools in the state, not our neighbor, but Danbury is an extremely large high school at 3,400 students. Starting to look at other high schools that are sort of similar in overall population and just our neighbors. You start to see Southington High School is there at 19, you know, just under 2,000. So there are comparable schools to this size model that you see there. So we wanted to sort of do that list and just as a comparison to what other high schools have that same sort of rating and so forth. So just a good comparison in terms of size of buildings to a single high school and what is being done throughout the state of Connecticut.
Just when you think we'd be done, we're going to look now at some other programs, Central Office, Adult Ed, and the Transition Academy. So Adult Ed is in the train station and will be relocating likely at some point. They're occupying about just under 6,000 square feet, and their wish list is just over 6,000 square feet. So we're using this as our design guide to what their needs are as we test fit a location for them. We also looked at the Wallingford Transition Academy. This program has been kind of, hasn't had a permanent home for a while. It's been moving around and is currently at Parker Farms. It's a smaller program. They have needs just under about 2,000 square feet. One classroom, kitchen, life skills, bathroom, and storage. So we're gonna look about test fitting that also. And then we have Central Office. We took a tour of Central Office, understood how their departments are being used, what they occupy. Some departments are broken up in pieces, so we kind of want to test fit those in to just over around 14,000 square feet to see how they would work. So here's a floor plan of the police station, which is likely relocating in the spring of 2024. So how could we fit all of these programs in this building? So this is our layout, and I'll kind of walk you through it. Here's your front door. You would come into your waiting area, reception, where mail would get dropped off. You'd come in, and the first program right here is your personnel suite with a couple offices, some open cubicles, a conference room and storage. Next is your special education suite. Some storage needs are pretty big here because you do have to keep hard files and have a lot of filing cabinets, so we're trying to get that storage in. So that's your special education PPS suite. Next is your curriculum and instruction suite. This one's a little larger with more offices. And then next we have the boardroom and kitchen over here, and then the business suite to the front here. So all of those barely fit in. I mean, the major needs get in, but storage is pretty light fitting in there. Upstairs, though, is, since the chief is up there, we put the superintendent up there and her people, along with a conference room. So that kind of works as a nice little suite up there. On the lower level, which is a sunken level, there are some openings for windows that would need to be opened again and probably insert some more windows along this building if we could. But we created an entry at the parking lot here, coming into a vestibule with a lobby and the director's office there. They come down by ramp or stair, just a little bit lower. There's a conference room right at the door, restrooms and everything down that hallway. Childcare, so they're dropped off kind of right at the door. Moving up, there's some offices to the side here, along with your 4 classrooms. We're working with existing structure here, so these classrooms are a little narrower than we'd like, but they do meet their 500 square feet that they need. And then over here, we have the Transition Academy suite, where you come into a corridor, have your classroom, your kitchenette, and your life skills and toilet room. Moving down the corridor, we have a few additional offices, your counselor and your testing, and then your computer room and server room, and then a larger classroom here. So again, it fits in somewhat, but there are storage needs lacking, and some of the space is not as ideal in layout. And this also comes with a price tag. We're breaking it up because there are different reimbursement rates for central office versus adult ed. So we're taking the square footage there, applying reimbursement rates. This is a $10.2 million project, and the anticipated town share would be 6.2. The police station does need some pretty decent renovations if you saw all those new walls to get it into, you know, office layout. So with that.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. So the conversion to the police station, it would be a challenge to fit in there, that lower level. You know, there's cells that are currently down there. There was once a firing range, so it's all can be achieved and can be adapted to educational learning that's down there, but there's obviously a cost that goes to try to do that, and you know, definitely a deeper dive with that architect in the future would need to work out that. The square footage are just there. There's not a lot of room for expansion, but it has some possibility of at least further expansion. So with that, I'd like to conclude our presentation. So as you see, there is sort of that consistency of the declined enrollment. It's, you know, it remains sort of flat, but the high school definitely jumps out as being the largest part, and that impact of that. We looked at your overall utilization, and what's interesting is the buildings that are higher utilized. Right now, the enrollment projections shows steady, but when we get to the high school, your enrollment drops and your utilization is now underutilized. So it's interesting how those two sort of compare with each other. Looking at your programmatic and your facility needs, you have spent a long time on your overall capital needs plan, which I applaud you because some districts don't have that fully in place. And that shows improvements along each of those buildings that you were contemplating doing. Probably the biggest thing that we see is the HVAC improvements and the mindset of ventilation and air conditioning within schools has drastically changed over the past 2 years. The state is also looking at different methods of incentivizing that from happening, so we have inserted that into this presentation. But you begin to see areas such as portables, you begin to see restrooms. We are currently under a new building code. The ADA and accessibility improvements continue to sort of improve and be mindful of that. When you get to your high schools, your science, your CTE, your art, your music, the gym, and so forth, those are big projects. Those are things that could definitely improve the overall programmatic needs. And then just looking across the district as the inventory that you have with central office, adult ed, and so forth, as we concluded how to relocate to the former police station just as a test fit, and it's, you're sort of right there, and I think you'd need further contemplation to fit all of that in that space. So with that, we are, we'll turn it back to you, and thank you very much.
Thank you for this presentation. We truly appreciate all the work and the time that went into this, so thank you very much. Just for the public's purposes at this point, just wanted to share a couple of things. This presentation will be posted on our website tomorrow. I will also be sending out a communication to all staff and our family members, including this presentation, so that they have a copy of it as well and can go back and review it for their purposes, and being able to kind of just look at it and kind of digest a lot of the information that was here. So thank you for that. We truly appreciate it. Additionally, we'll be setting up a follow-up meeting. It will be a virtual meeting. It will be on November 14th. It will follow our operations committee meeting, so we'll have that meeting first. We'll close that meeting, and then we will have a special Board of Education meeting set up after that. That too will be virtual, but there we'll have public comment, and it will give the Board of Education members an opportunity to review the information, discuss it. I know Mr. Stein and Mrs. Miller are available to join us virtually that evening as well, so they will be on as well in case board members have any questions for them.
Thank you, Superintendent Belizzi, and thank you all. That was a lot to digest. We have some homework to do. But I just want to thank you. I know there's a lot that went into that, and I know you spent a lot of time in our schools, and I also want to recognize all the administrators that in the very beginning of the school year, just the first couple months, you've all spent a lot of time going with the consultants through the buildings over the summer and these past few weeks. So I want to thank all of you for your time and effort as well. Any other comments or words of thanks from the board? Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you again on the 14th.
Thank you.
I believe that is it for our presentations this evening. I will entertain a motion to go into executive session. Mrs. Reagan, seconded by Mr. Ross. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Abstention? Motion carries. We're in executive session. Thank you very much. Welcome back. I will entertain a motion to come out of executive session.
Second.
I have Mr. Ross and Mr. Doring as the first and second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstention? Motion carries. We're out of executive session. Next on our agenda is the consent agenda. I will entertain a motion to accept consent agenda items number 7.1 through 7.14.
So move.
I have Mr. Ross as a first. Can I have a second?
Second.
Mrs. Roscoe is the second. All those in favor signifay by saying aye.
Excuse me, can we have a discussion on the motion?
Oh, I'm sorry. Absolutely. We have a first and a second by Mr. Ross and Mrs. Roscoe. Any discussion?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I believe 12.2, discussion and possible approval of conflict of interest, belongs here on the consent agenda, because at the last instructional meeting, at the very end, to kind of summarize real quickly, if you people remember, Mrs. Costelli wanted to add a paragraph or a sentence or two to the policy as we were discussing it. At the end of that discussion, she said, if I withdraw my addition, can we leave the bylaw as is? And we all agreed to say yes. So that means it should be on the consent agenda. It shouldn't, we're not discussing impossible approval. We already decided that night, took consensus. So therefore, I feel like it should be on the consent agenda.
I agree, Mike.
Okay, well, we can't change the agenda now.
Yeah, we can if we take a
But
vote.
we also,
If we take
that,
a two-thirds vote,
excuse me, I can't have multiple people, I will listen to everyone. I do remember that evening, Mrs. Caselli did read something. We did not have it, so there was no language for any of us to review. It was just read at that one time. There was also other language proposed that we did not have. So my understanding is it was on the consent, or not on the consent agenda tonight, so that everybody would have the chance to speak to it. So,
Kathy withdrew her thing. She withdrew it. Then you had asked about putting Jen's in there, but Jen did not put it in at that previous policy committee. So her part that she wanted was never put into the,
right, because it was a 2-to-1.
it was for whatever reason, it was not put in there. She wasn't there that night either, so therefore Kathy withdrew her. I mean, it's no big deal. I'm just saying we don't need to discuss impossible approval of that because we already took a consensus to leave it as is without Kathy's addition, without any addition that Jen may have wanted because it never came to the table, what she wanted. So therefore, we took consensus on it. I looked at the video today. It was very, very last thing.
And we could put it on consent and then pull it from consent and discuss it
I'm just
again.
saying, just to do it correctly, because it really doesn't belong there. We already made consensus, so it should be on the consent agenda. And if somebody wants to pull it from there, they can ask to have an item removed from the consent agenda before we vote and discuss it.
So right now, I have a first and second to approve 1 through 14. Are you making a motion to modify the agenda?
Well, discussion on the motion would be what I just said, so therefore the motion would have to be taken back because it would not be, you would have to make another motion to say, I make a motion to accept the consent agenda with the addition of a 7.15 conflict of interest bylaw, something like that. I would think that's right. Does that sound right, board members? No? Yes? Maybe? I mean, my only thing is, it seems like we're doing something we already did with number 12.2. We already took consensus to leave it as is. I'm sure you people remember what Kathy said. Kathy said, if I withdraw my statement and leave it as is, are we all set to accept that? And everybody said yes, and then we were done. And I think Carrie's last words were, I will put it on the consent agenda. And it's not on the consent agenda. There's no need for discussion and approval unless somebody decides to take it off the consent agenda. Does that make sense? Yes. Anybody else?
So I did watch the video after Mr. Votto brought this to my attention this afternoon, and that is correct. We went back and forth quite a bit with Mrs. Castelli's proposed language, with putting it under the instructional committee report section. But at the end, around 2 hours and 50-minute mark of the instructional video, Mrs. Castelli withdrew her motion for an amendment to that bylaw. The board took consensus on the policy as written, and I stated it would go on consent. So the fact that I put it under instructional was because I never replaced that last bit on my notes from the meeting, so I apologize for that. But Mr. Votto is correct.
So
now the question is, how do we fix it?
Does anybody want to, well, let's go through one. Oh, no, we have to go back because we have 1 to 14 and you want to add to it, so we can't accept the consent as it
So you have
is.
to withdraw your motion.
So does anybody want to modify the consent agenda to put something on there, and then we can talk about whether anybody wants to modify it and take it off?
I think we first need
I
to,
think I got to remove my motion first, so we can talk about it.
you made the motion?
I made the motion.
You made
Okay.
the motion? Okay, so you're going to remove,
So I'm removing my motion to approve the consent agenda.
okay?
Then I think we need to make a motion to amend, not agenda, to amend the agenda to remove 12.2 and add that as a number 7.15 on the consent agenda, which is to just approval of bylaw 9270, conflict of interest. So in order to change the agenda, we need a majority vote. Does that sound right, folks?
2/3.
Sounds good to me.
Yep.
I mean, I just thought we do things the right way.
You want to make the motion?
You want me to make a motion?
I think he just did. He needs a second.
Yep, I'll second.
Okay. Any other discussion? Mrs. Lavelle, can you do a roll call? And this is to move item 12.2 to 7.15.
Mrs. Castelli?
Yes.
Mr. Doring?
Yes.
Mrs. Passaretti?
Yes.
Mrs. Regan?
Yes.
Mr. Reynolds?
Yes.
Mrs. Roscoe?
Yes. Yes.
Mr. Ross?
Yes.
Mr. Votto?
Yes.
Mrs. Raccio?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Back to the consent agenda. Do we have a motion to approve items 7.1 to 7.15?
So move.
Any discussion? I would like to remove 7.15, conflict of interest, for further discussion because all board members weren't present when we took the consent. Is there a second? So that's the discussion.
You're moving to move it to, removing from consent.
Removing it from consent so that all board members can discuss it.
If you need a second, I'll second.
That would make it a motion. She just wants to discuss the motion.
Right.
I want to remove it from consent.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's removed from consent. So then we're now going to go back to approving 7.1 to 7.14.
All right, so if you move it from consent, where is it going, can I ask?
Number 8, items removed from consent.
Oh, that's what you wanted to. All right.
So we have to modify, it has to be, we're approving 7.1 through 7.14. That's the motion that has to be presented, because you've asked to have 7.15 pulled.
Are you with me on that, Mr. Votto? You understand it? Yeah. Okay. So then we're back to where we were. Do I still have the motion? I still have a motion then for 7.1 to 7.14. And is that still Mr. Ross?
Yep.
And were you the second? Yes. Okay. All those, any further discussion on 7.1 to 7.14? Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Now, 7.15, which was conflict of interest, formerly 12.2, is now item removed from consent agenda. And I removed that. So at the last meeting, Mrs. Castelli, you did propose language that not all board members were present at that meeting. And during policy committee I think 2 months ago, Mrs. Passaretti had language that did not move forward to the entire board in written format. because that was a 2-to-1 vote at the policy committee, so it did not come to the whole board. My concern is that as board members, we don't have in print either one of those statements. I may like them both, I may like neither one, but just hearing it read at a meeting doesn't give me time to digest it, doesn't give me time to reflect on it. So I'd like to get both of those statements. I understand it didn't come, 2 people didn't like the language that Mrs. Passaretti proposed, so it didn't make it to the 9 of us. And Mrs. Passaretti, you weren't there to hear Mrs. Castelli's proposed language, which you may very well like. So what I would like to do is see if we can agree that all of the proposed language comes in front of the entire board
At instructional.
at the next instructional committee meeting where we have policy. Is there policy next month, Mrs. Latour, or is that all improvement plans?
So first, I just need to clarify, the language that Mrs. Passaretti proposed at the policy committee meeting in September was not a 2-to-1 vote. It was discussed as a committee that it would go forward for full discussion at the board at the instructional meeting in October. Mrs. Passaretti was not at the instructional meeting in October. Mrs. Castelli proposed her language through the official channels of making a motion, and Mrs. Passaretti's language was not entertained at that time because she was not present at the meeting. We will have another policy committee meeting in November. We will have an instructional meeting in November prior to that meeting. So November's instructional meeting already has the policy from the October meeting of last week. So you're just kind of kicking this bylaw down the road even further. So just to clarify, since I watched the meeting again this afternoon from last month, the board that was in the attendance at the October instructional committee meeting, Mrs. Castelli withdrew her motion from additional language, so the board that was in attendance that evening took consensus on the language that is presented in your packet this evening. So no additional language was added. Mrs. Passaretti's wasn't added because there wasn't an official motion. Mrs. Castelli's wasn't added because she withdrew her motion at the time. And the rest of the members took consensus on the policy as written, just to make sure everybody's on the same page.
And if I remember, this policy was addressed by me at the previous instructional meeting. And I did present language for this particular policy. And no one really agreed with me. No one said anything. So that's why I sort of let it die on the vine.
I think that was, we've never seen any language, though. I think you've read something, like Mrs. Castelli did.
In
We've
September.
never, it was not, I don't think we've ever seen anything.
But the general consensus of the committees, and I do think we have to empower our committees to make decisions, because that's what their job is. Like, we reviewed this is what came out of it. It was a no for her policy, for whatever language it was, 2-to-1. I would have considered that dead. That's done. We're fine. It's not being presented forward. Mrs. Castelli presented something, and then she withdrew it. And I would say at that point, that's also dead and gone. She withdrew it. She did not want it for further consideration. I think we are literally, just as Mrs. Latour has said, kicking this can down the road. Both languages have been discussed, and the consensus was, we don't need to hear anything more about this. We don't need to see it. We could have said we wanted to see it at the last meeting, and we said no. We took consensus, and we moved on. I think we just need to move this on. Mrs. Castelli.
And I just want to make the point that there were 8 members who voted for that consensus. There was only 1 board member missing.
Mr. Doran?
So I apologize. Could someone just please clarify for me what we're discussing? Are we still discussing this tonight, or are we saying the discussion itself will be happening at a future meeting? I'm just struggling to follow the discussion.
We are now discussing the item 7.15, which was 12.2, as an item on the consent agenda. So we are discussing 12.2 as a consent agenda item. So my concern was making sure that everybody had access to the language. I personally did not think the language that Mrs. Castelli proposed was bad for just hearing it. I would have liked to have read it to see if I could support it.
Didn't we?
I never saw it, Kathy, so a copy again doesn't, like, I'm not trying to be difficult, but
I
as a
just
board
want to
member-
clarify, it wasn't sent to the entire board because Mrs. Castelli withdrew it that evening. Mrs. Passaretti is correct. The September instructional meeting, this policy was discussed at length, and it was sent back to policy, which was the September Policy Committee meeting in which Mrs. Castelli, Mr. Reynolds, and Mrs. Passaretti decided not to change the policy, but to bring the discussion forward in October to hear all sides without formally adjusting the policy for review at the October Instructional Committee meeting. At the Instructional Committee meeting, it was decided by the members in attendance, and Mrs. Castelli is accurate that there were 8 members in attendance, that the policy, proposed policy, should remain as written. All motions were withdrawn that evening. No additional language was suggested, which is why it came forward this evening. My fault for putting it in the wrong spot, and I do apologize for causing all of this. But it was a recap of the conversation was the policy was fine as written, that it has been working for many years, seemingly fine. I believe Mr. Ross made the comment, again, because I watched it this afternoon, if it's not broken, don't fix it. So that's about as much as I remember from September and October. There wasn't any language delivered to the board in writing, Mrs. Castelli's proposed motion, because it never made it to a vote to add to the policy.
I'm fine with withdrawing the motion and taking consent on this. So I will withdraw or actually, I will entertain a motion for acceptance of 7.15, which was previously removed from consent agenda.
So move.
Second.
First and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And that passes. We are now on to correspondence, and Mrs. Roscoe.
Thank you, Mrs. Raccio. So we have a few items tonight, and I just want to say a general thank you for all of the donations that come in month over month. They really do help to bolster our education here in Wallingford. So our first thank you is to Walmart of Wallingford in care of Evelyn Smiles. This donation came in the amount totaling $6,133, and it was obtained through a Stuff a Cruiser, where they collected school supplies to benefit Wallingford Public Schools, and this event was held on August 27th, and it seems like it was an amazing success. So we know those, yeah, amazing, right? We know that those school supplies will really be put to amazing use. Our next acknowledgement is from Christopher Pornosky, and this amount donated was in the value of $2,000, and that money was allocated to the Families in Need account. And just a little bit about that, the funds from this account are allocated through Sheehan High School, and they go to families who are experiencing significant financial hardships. So needless to say, that money will be put to really good use. Also, Christopher, Mr. Votto's giving you an extra shout out here. He's very appreciative. Our next acknowledgement of thank you is to Miss Marjorie Bishop for the donation of various school supplies. They are totaling in the amount of $1,260, and this is going to the Sheehan High School students, so thank you so much. This donation really helped students acquire the supplies that are needed in order to really have the best education possible. Then we have a couple of thank you notes that came to the Board of.
There was a second person on that letter, too. They do mention that the Staples, Matthew Grande, it was both of them who made that donation.
Thank you so much for that correction. I do not want anyone to feel slighted. Also Staples of Wallingford, Mr. Matthew Grande, as well as Miss Marjorie Bishop. Thank you so much. And we have 2 thank you notes. I will just read them quickly. Dear Danielle and the Board of Education, our whole family thanks you for the beautiful funeral floral arrangements that you sent. It was one of our favorites and helped to brighten our day. With gratitude, Kathleen Nealon. And the next one, dear friends at the Board of Education, thank you so much for the beautiful flower arrangement you sent. Your kindness means a great deal to us during this difficult time. Sincerely, Joe and Jen Passaretti. And that is all I have for the correspondence. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mrs. Rasko. We are moving on to committee reports, and the first is the ACES Governing Board. Mr. Ross.
I have no report. I was unavailable.
That's right. We will look forward to that next month. And the next one is system-wide PTAC.
We had system-wide PTAC last week, and it was a very well-attended meeting, wonderful opportunity to review not only community events, but different initiatives that the membership of system-wide PTAC cultivated in their meeting from September. Brian Rivard spoke to several topics that would be a highlight for system-wide PTAC in the coming year, and they are also eagerly preparing for the Parent Choice Awards that will be coming up in November. So we look forward to that. It's a wonderful evening, and it will be in person this year, which will be nice to get back to seeing all of our teachers and their families and the families that nominated them. It's a very special evening to attend, so more details will be forthcoming.
Thank you. And Special Education PTAC.
Good evening. Maybe. We met on September 27th, where we had an information session on the new IEP for parents. We discussed in detail, page by page, of what the new IEP looks like, as well as the 504 plan. And it was very well attended by not only Wallingford residents, but of families of students that attend the VOAG school. So that was great to see families from all towns around the area. It was great. Our next meeting is tomorrow, 6 o'clock. Martha Karsten, one of our teachers from Moran Middle School, is presenting on dyslexia and how to support your child at home. It is Dyslexia Awareness Month, so this is something that we're focusing on. We will also elect our officers for PTAC. And then next month at this time, Level Up, which is a community service for adults, young adults, will be presenting how to access those services.
Wonderful. And the Food Service Strategic Planning Committee. Your meeting is Wednesday. We look forward to that update next month. Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee.
Our committee met for the first time on October 18th. We convened with teachers, and we are working to bring in student voice for the next meeting. We spent time reviewing last year's work with our students and committee members in terms of our working vision statement and mission statement for the committee, work ahead in the district, and we hope to get that to the board after our meeting next month, where we solidify that, and our next meeting is November 15th.
Thank you. And CABE report. I will share with the board that there has been chatter on the listserv about many districts who were not very happy with the timeline for the HVAC grant. Many are in the same boat as we are, that had they had the length of time that's necessary to develop the requirements to apply for the grant, they would have. The districts and the chairs that did respond already had something that they could put into the program as a reimbursable item. Nobody started from square one from those who answered on the listserv, and it was, oh, we have a project in the works that's now eligible for this. But nobody really had the ability to pull something together from scratch to actually apply for the HVAC grant. So we were in the same position as many others. Unfortunately, maybe something will change. I see nothing for old business, so we are moving on to instructional committee. Mrs. Passeretti, Mr. Votto.
Thank you. Mrs. Raccio. The first item of business, 12.1, the approval of acceptance of leave of absences. I make a motion that a leave of absence for Amanda Gloa be approved without pay and in accordance with the provisions of the current teacher's contract from November 21st, 2022 through February 17th, 2023. Do I have a second? Is there any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed signify by saying nay.
Nay.
Any abstentions? Motion does not carry. Next, I make a motion that the leave of absence for Kristen Borer be approved without pay and in accordance with the provisions of the current teacher's contract from November 21st, 2022 through December 23, 2022. Do I have a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion on the motion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you. Next on the agenda is the Operations Committee. So I'm going to send it right back to Mrs. Raccio so she can bounce it back to Mrs.
You didn't want it any longer. Mrs. Reagan and Mrs. Costelli, Operations Committee, please.
Good evening. So the Operations Committee met last month. I don't have the date, I do apologize, but we met in October. We're at the beginning of the year, so these meetings are pretty short. There's not a whole lot to discuss. We had our committee reports where Mr. Barone went over the financials. We're coming in with a projection of $423,000 for the month of October. We did discuss some of the 2% allocations. So the normal course of business, we talked about the lunch program and some of the work that was being done from Mr. Deptula. So that's all I have.
Thank you very much. Moving on to new business, I was hoping, Mr. Votto, you might be able to share with us a little bit on the kinder ground.
Did you go, by the way?
I did not get a chance to go, even though I wanted to, but if you could share with us that community event.
Yeah, there's a community event happening spearheaded by two of our former teachers probably were involved in it. One of them is our former transitional teacher, Terry Ohala, and the other special ed teacher from Lyman Hall, and his name escapes me right now. Sorry. Anyhow, what they are starting in the lobby of the library, there's that big area that's not used, really. They are starting a cafe that will be run by special needs adults. They are kicking this off with donations from people because it's going to be an expense for the furniture and to hire somebody to kind of manage the place during the day. So there'll be tables and chairs throughout that area, a counter to help yourself for coffee and all that, and then in the nice weather, they're even going to move it outside under the canopy. They had like an opening the other day. Mrs. Raccio let me know that it was going on. I had heard nothing about this. And you went down there and you tasted 4 different coffees. Now, I don't drink coffee too much, and I certainly don't drink it black. But they gave you a little bit like this to taste. And I had to judge which one was the best. That was not too easy, but I think I put down number 1, which did taste better than the others. And you put your name and the coffee you picked in a jar, and there was a raffle, but at the same time, they, I guess, decided what coffee they will serve when this place does open up. I mean, it really is a great idea, and it was just so heartwarming to know we have these people in town that are willing to do this for our special needs population. And I think they need final approval from the library board at this point. I think it's a go-ahead thing, and they're just waiting for that final approval. And once that's done, I guess they're going to start putting things together. So it's really a great idea, and I wanted the public to know about that. And I'll see how you can, I think they're having a fundraiser November 6th up where the old mountainside used to be.
New Life Church.
Right, New Life Church.
Mr. Votto?
November
Mr. Votto,
3rd?
Sorry, it's November 3rd.
Okay, you know.
I just pulled it up. It is at the New Life Church. It's from 5:30 to 8 o'clock on Thursday, November 3rd.
And what's going to be, I forgot, I don't have the flyer with me.
Maybe we could put that flyer on the community bulletin board and a link in our weekly
Yes,
update.
I will add the
I think
link
there's
on
advanced
Friday.
ticket sales for that.
Yes, there was. Yeah, there is. So I will add that for this
Okay,
Friday
thank you.
as
I
well.
mean,
You're welcome.
It's just a great idea, and I'm so happy to have to say it so everybody knows about it, and thank you for letting me know.
Absolutely. I know there's a few of us from central office that will be attending as well, so it will be lovely.
Is the New Life Church, is that at the end of New? High Hill Road, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Okay. Moving along, administration report. Mrs. Blizzy.
Good evening again, everyone. Just a few highlights to share. We are back doing parent-teacher conferences in person, so we've kind of progressed along this past month, and we're continuing to hold those. And so it's such a lovely opportunity for parents to be able to come into the buildings, meet with their teachers in person, learn about their students' progress, walk the buildings, just get back to some of the normal pre-COVID, post-COVID, things that we used to do in pre-COVID times. So it's exciting and a great opportunity, along with the many events that the students have shared that are coming up for the end of this month and the beginning of November. Last week, we also launched our new website, which we are very, very proud of, and a huge thank you to Mrs. Karen Vayu and all of our administrators and central office staff that worked very hard with Karen to make sure that was a go. So if you haven't checked it out yet, please do. A lot of hard work and time went into it. I think it really makes everything very efficient and easy to find. There were a few glitches along the way, but we're kind of working those out as we go. But it really is a beautiful website, and it's in multiple languages, which I think is really wonderful for our families to be able to access that. So,
And it's very mobile responsive. I just looked at it today. I'm like,
Thank
oh,
you.
that's very nice. So kudos, very mobile responsive.
great job, Mrs. Vayu, great job. And then the last thing I just kind of wanted, we touched and talked about, some of the students shared about our Red Ribbon Week this week. So we have some events happening this week. I did share the calendar with all of you so you could see. We also have an event here this Wednesday. In this chambers here. It's the Red Ribbon Community Event, which begins at 6 o'clock. So we're looking forward to that as well. So that will start here. And then the last thing I wanted to share was just a few donations that are value is a total of under $500. So I just wanted to share a few of those. So we had received from National Healthcare via Amy Foreman some school supplies. That was a value of $150. So we thank them for that. Chick-fil-A via Todd Langston has donated to the College and Career Center at Lyman Hall in Sheehan with a value of $305. So we thank him for that as well. We received a basket of apples from Blue Hills Orchard with a value of $10 to the College and Career Center, so we thank them for that. Additionally, Neil's Donuts has donated donuts and pastries in the value of $200. And we also received from Rite Aid of Wallingford via Dana, their assistant manager there, $200 worth of supplies to Pond Hill, Parker Farms, Cook Hill, and Stevens Elementary School. So thank you to everyone who has made those donations to our school system. We truly appreciate it. That's all we have for this evening.
That's it?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. Moving on to announcements, we have meetings to announce. We have on Monday, November 7th, our next instructional committee meeting, and that will be via Google Meet at 6 o'clock. Monday, November 14th, this Operations Committee meeting at 6 p.m. Immediately following the Operations Committee meeting, we will have a special board meeting, also via Google Meet. The next day of our in-person meeting here at Robert F. Parisi Town Council Chambers is November 28th after Thanksgiving, and that is at 6:30. Having no other official business to come before the board, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you and have a good night.